meeting of the Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport Legislation Committee, and unless Senator Back shows early interest, we'll yield the floor to Senator
happy to
Steele.
see Senator Steele.
He's always happy to see Senator Steele.
Look, thanks, Chair. And, look, Mr. Harfield, in this line of questioning, I'm going to try and work in tandem with my chair and others, because I want to talk around questions of the audit that the ANAO has tabled, bearing in mind that work's not finished, and I'll just see if we can get some questions to you and seek your answers. So in terms of the One Sky program, I'd first ask, without all the preamble, but I do note that Airservices is responsible for developing and implementing its own procurement policies and procedures, and such policies are expected to meet general obligations regarding the proper use of resources and effective internal control. So I ask Mr. Harfield, how often are Airservices procurement's policies and procedures reviewed?
Senator, they have just been reviewed, obviously in light of the ANAO report, but they should be, and I'm just like, do you know?
Reviewed on a regular basis, Senator. I think the pieces that we learnt out of the ANAO audit was particularly around competitive processes and the use thereof, and as a consequence of that,
Without interrupting your flow,
sorry.
could you give me your
Sorry,
name and title to start for Hansard, please?
Paul Logan, Airservices Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Logan.
So as a result of the ANAO audit, we were looking at a particular area around the use of competitive processes and trying to make sure that they were adequately described and the criteria for when those processes should be used, the criteria around those were adequately described in our policy and procedure.
So, Mr. Logan, when Mr. Hartfield looked at you, you said quite often. How often is quite often? And what I would do, Chair, through you, because we are so far behind time, to work with the Chair and all the committee members, if we can get the questions and answers pretty direct,
sure.
I would appreciate that, because we can always come back after at another time, but I'd rather get through it. So,
Can I make an observation just at that point? This committee is very concerned and remains with significantly heightened concern about the operations of your body. So I too would urge you to get to the point, hair on it and all, because this is an ongoing matter. The committee sits on a deliberation as to whether it will have an inquiry into these matters, and it would certainly assist us if you're able to get to the heart of the question without too much window dressing, without in any way, Mr. Logan or Mr. Hartfield, limiting your answers.
Would it also just assist is that we have here, just for the record, the ANA recommendation and the actions that we have taken against every one of those recommendations, can have it, and to table it here for the committee.
Sure.
For the committee's
Thank you. We'll look forward to that.
and you may be able to refer to some of my questions. So, Mr. Logan, I'll come back to you. How often is very often? Or
I'm
quite
sorry,
often?
Senator, if I said very often, that wasn't my answer.
Oh, okay.
We review them from time to time.
Okay.
I've only been in the role for the last 12 to 18 months. In that time, I've taken on the ANAO recommendations and have sought to, as Mr. Harfield's handing through, bolster the practices and procedures.
Okay, now, Mr. Logan, it's not assisting me. So if you don't know, say you don't know. That's quite all right.
So I don't know how often in prior times.
Okay, so we've changed from quite often or often to don't know. That's fine. Thank you. As in terms of, if you don't know, maybe someone else might, or Mr. Hartfield, who's been around a long time too, when was the last time, can you tell us the last time there was, you reviewed your procedures and procurement policies prior to this committee writing to the ANO to seek an audit of Airservices?
I don't know, Senator. I'll have
That's
to
right.
find out.
Mr. Hartfield, do you?
I don't know.
No, that's all right. That's okay. That's no drama. Oh, no, I accept that. So are you confident that at this time your policies meet your general obligations regarding the proper use of resources and effective internal controls?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Now, on the 31st of August this year, the ANAO tabled its first performance audit report of Airservices in its procurement of the International Centre for Complex Project Management to assist on the One Sky Australia program. Audit report, the ANAO found a lack of probity, a lack of competitive tendering and a lack of cost control, which ensured that Airservices did not get value for money for the $1.5 billion One Sky air traffic control system.
Senator, can I just recorrect that? The
Sure.
actual audit doesn't say about the value for the 1.5 billion air traffic, because that process is still ongoing and we're negotiating. It was around the contracting with ICCPM.
Okay. Yep.
Because we still are not into contract with One Sky. At this moment in time, we are still under negotiation, and the second part of the ANAO audit is looking into the tender process into One Sky. I'm just concerned that because we are under negotiations for the contract still, I don't want to negotiate this in public. That's
Mr Harfield, the chair has made it very clear, okay, if there's answers that can't come now for some reason that you will explain to us, that's fine.
right.
It may go a long way to determining whether we do have an inquiry or whether we don't have an inquiry, so
understood.
I understand that. So then I will not put words in your mouth, but am I right to say you, well no, I'll ask you, do you accept the finding by the ANA?
Accept the findings by the ANAO, and that's why we've accepted all the recommendations.
Okay. Why do you accept them?
Because we accept the findings. We agree with the findings that they have found.
Okay.
As I said before, the dinner break is that the main issue was that how we saw these things transpire in this engagement with ICCPM as, and it's described in the first recommendation from the ANAO, that these were systemic within the organisation in our procurement practices, and there was a cultural elements that needed to be addressed within the organisation.
Okay, thank you. Now I'll go to the December 2009 National Aviation White Paper that recognised an ideal opportunity to synchronise the air traffic management capability and support requirements of Airservices and Defence, given that both parties were to undergo major equipment upgrades and replacement programs from 2013. And this committee did an inquiry around that time too, as you would well remember. Now, a request for tender for the joint procurement was released on the 28th of June 2013. It closed on October 2013, the 30th of October,
Correct.
with 6 tenders received.
That's
Okay?
correct.
Correct, okay. So according to Airservices, there were 3,000 requirements under the tender evaluation process. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So my question is, who determined how many requirements there would be and what they were?
They were determined by jointly between Airservices and the Department of Defence. They were determined by the project teams and the subject matter experts in air traffic control engineering that to actually formulate the requirements associated with the joint system. Those requirements were set on a joint, on the basis of a what was called the Common Operating Concept for Air Traffic Management in Australia, which was signed off by the Chief of Air Force and the CEO of Airservices at the time.
Right.
Just
Yeah, please.
a procedural matter to keep it in timeline. We've received this summary of Airservices improvement actions relevant to the ANAO recommendations. That's how we'll describe the document. Does anyone have any objection to this being tabled?
Not at all. Welcome it.
Thank you, Senator Sterling.
Okay, so Mr Harfield then, I just had a heart attack then, I thought we were missing a division, sorry. So on the 28th of February 2015, it was announced that Airservices, in partnership with Defence, would enter into an advanced work contracting arrangement with Thales, is that how we say it?
Talus.
Talus, okay, Talus. I ask it every time. Talus Australia to deliver One Sky, that's correct?
That's correct, sir.
Yep, okay. So can you outline what happened in the 16 months between the closing of tenders and the successful tender being announced?
Senator, technically we haven't had a successful tender because we're not in final contract at this particular stage. So I do premise it that what I'm about to say is based on public information because tender process.
Very clear.
We have a 5-stage tender process that was conducted. The first phase that was conducted during November 2013 was what you call registration, making sure that the tenders complied with the prerequisite to be considered. That went into a different, the next phase 2, which was sort of a semi-shortlisting process. At that stage, we down selected to 4 tenderers. 4 at that particular stage. At the beginning of 2014, we went into what was phase 3, which was the detailed evaluation. That detailed evaluation went through a number of the requirements, assessing the tenders through 5 separate categories. The first one was the technical, operational and safety element. The second element was to do with the transition of the system. The third one was support. The fourth one was support. The next one was the commercials and the financial. So there was 5 that were considered, all those 4 tenders. At the end of phase 3, if my memory serves me correctly, we went down to 2 tenderers at that particular stage, where we went into what was called additional evaluation, which was considered around the extra pieces that we sort of divided what was core or really important, and then there was some additional functionality that needed to be assessed. At the end of that phase and going into phase 5, which was a negotiation phase, we originally expected to go in and do parallel negotiations between two or more tenderers. However, at the end of that, based on the decision was made to take 1 tenderer into negotiations, which was Talus, and a second tenderer was at that stage set aside, sort of, you can put on ice and held there. As we proceed through phase 5, that was divided into a number of stages. One stage, 5A, was to make sure that some of the risk or non-compliances in the tender were made whole, to make sure, because none of the tenderers that were put forward were fully compliant. So all 6 at the start were not fully compliant. And we went through discovery and then got into critical negotiations with Talus.
Okay.
During that time, to make sure, because the intent was to go to a fixed price contract, we identified a number of risks that needed to be established, and to make sure that we stayed on the critical path to ensure that we start an implementation in the 2018 period onwards, because we're trying to deal with maintain an air traffic system and replace 2 systems that are coming to end of life, the defence system and the Airservices system. We we established an advance work order where we can bring packages of work out of the contract forward and work on it, so that we can ameliorate the risk, so we don't end up going into a fixed price contract that has too much risk in it and is not commercially viable, and continues on the path while we sort those issues out, and we're still in that process today.
Okay. So did Talus meet all 3,000 requirements under the tender evaluation process?
Now, as I said just previously, not all tenderers, no tenderer was fully compliant. And part of the negotiation period is to make sure that we establish all of those requirements.
Okay, so of the 3,000, how many were short with Talus?
I can't tell you off the top of my head. I can take that on notice.
Okay, can Mr Logan?
Not off the top of my head, Senator.
You can tell me off the top of
No,
your
not
head?
off the top of my head.
Give us a clue. Were they miles short? How was the quality of the other tenderers? Are we talking 1,000 short? Are we talking half a
They
dozen?
were the best
Just
tenderer
roughly.
in that regard. What I can say is that they were the most compliant tenderer.
So what was the procedures that we used to assess how good they were?
There's the tender evaluation process that's been undertaken, which the ANAO are currently auditing.
Okay, so come back to my question just before. How close were they?
Senator,
Roughly.
they were the best out of the 6 tenderers.